Here's a young lady who is sure to become a counselor who specializes in conflict resolution.
No, you took my snack. Yes, you did. I saw you. Are you trying to fool me? Okay then, no snacks. No munching. Got it, mister.
Now, here is a clip that is a little disturbing for me. When I was in college, I think we had 2 fellow students and 1 professor who were all named Steve Smith. But for a lot of us, we've never met another person with the same name as us. And if you're one of those like me, then open YouTube and type in your name, and chances are there will be someone using your name and possibly either making you feel better or worse about yourself. This Mark Bixler, seems to be well received by his audience, but I'll tell you ahead of time, he only has 8 followers on his YouTube channel.
You've been amazing so far, so please give a generous Comedy Works welcome to Mark Bixler!
What's up, Comedy Works? Yeah. My name is Mark Bixler, and my least favorite sport is wrestling. The sophomore year of high school, my best friend signed me up for the wrestling team. Now, to paint a picture for you guys, in the 10th grade, I was 5'1" and weighed 93 pounds. Yeah. I just crushed it with the ladies. Nope. I got crushed by the ladies. Because there was no one my size to wrestle me in practice. So the coach brought in his daughter to wrestle against me. It's your classic lose-lose situation right there. When they told me I actually had to wrestle someone in a real match, it was like very confusing because I'm in the 90 to 95 weight class. Friendships come at a premium. I shouldn't be wrestling this kid. We should be best friends. I was the first kid in league history to invite another kid to a sleepover. I lost the match, but I did win a sportsmanship award. Very proud of myself. True story, my very first match was a forfeit. So they still make you run out onto the mat, in a forfeit. So I'm all amped up, I got my singlet on and my headgear, and I run and I check into the judges' table. I turn the corner, not realizing that the wrestling mat's like 2 inches off the ground, catch an edge, face plant, knock the wind out of myself, right? Compose myself, get out to the middle, the ref throws both my arms in the air and calls it a tie. Thank you guys, I'm Mark Bixler, you've been great.
Now, I have to say, wrestling might also be my least favorite sport. I was in Derby, Kansas in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, and the toughest kid in our school in the 7th and 8th grade was Eddie Butler. There were about 400 students, and we all thought he was the toughest. Well, one day, the PE teacher decided that we'd wrestle, but he didn't do it the way that they do competition. He had us all gather around the mat and do it tag team style. I don't know who he chose to go first, but the simple rule was that when one of the wrestlers had had enough, then he could tag someone else. And then they had to take his place against the kid who had pinned him. Or maybe he had just been overpowering him. Well, of course, when Eddie Butler got into the ring, everyone was afraid of him. And I don't know whether he pinned the kid who tagged me or the kid was too scared to even try, but somehow he managed to tag me. Well, it didn't take Eddie long to have me down on the mat, and as he tried to pin me, he actually tore my knee ligament and put me on crutches. So needless to say, I'm more of a lover than a fighter, but not because I'm such a good person. It's more a matter of fear and self-preservation. Let's read the Beatitudes together, and you'll see perhaps why we started with these 2 stories. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Is it just coincidence that we're on this blessing one day after the attack on Iran? According to historian Will Durant, who compiled this statistic back in 1968, there had been 3,431 years of known wars in world history, and only 268 years of peace. Now, of course, there were always people warring against other people in smaller wars, and so we can conclude, really, that there has never been world peace. In a 10-year period, about 7 million divorces occur in the U.S. That would include 14 million adults, likely 20 million children at least. People who are living together but do not have even, who are not married, have even less stability in their relationships. So there is no peace in relationships. Well, maybe we can find peace within. Do you remember Paul Stuckey of Peter, Paul, and Mary? He observed that during the 60s, one of the most popular magazines was Life. And then during the 70s, a more popular one was, narrowed it down a little bit, and it was just People. And then another one came along called Us. And finally, the one got down to what people really cared about most was called Self. The baby boomer generation, those of us between 60 and 80 years old, has been called the me generation. The proliferation of self-help books and magazines reflect a desperate run from inner turmoil, or at least at best, a grasping for inner peace. If inner peace were there, the books wouldn't sell. This does establish one thing, though, and that is that people want peace. We are not made for constant conflict. A friend of mine had a friend who faced arguing and conflict and criticism every morning at the breakfast table. After breakfast, he would get in his car, drive down out of sight of his house, stop the car, and vomit in the ditch. If we want peace, if we need peace, why is there so little peace? The truth is, almost everyone wants peace. The supreme leader of Iran wanted peace. Vladimir Putin wants peace. Those who persecute Christians in India, Nigeria, and other places want peace. Our politicians on both sides of the aisle want peace. So again, if we want peace, if we need peace, why is there so little peace? Well, it's because there are many peace lovers, but very few peacemakers. Why? Well, it's because peacemaking involves sacrifice. Peace lovers want peace, but they want it on their own terms. We all want peace, but we usually insist on our own terms. But the truth is, we can be peacemakers. In fact, if we are following Christ, we will be peacemakers. But what if all around us, everybody is only a peace lover? They're only peace lovers. Doesn't it take two sides giving equally to make peace? No. That is a lie that Satan wants us to believe, but it's twisted. It takes two to fight, but it does not take two to make peace. What is true is that it takes two to fight, but that fact proves that it cannot be true that it takes two to make peace. Think about it. One person refuses to fight or to be in conflict. Well, that one has made peace, and maybe without any help from the other party. Now, that's not always fair. Usually, it's not fair. But if we complain about the unfairness of that and refuse to be peacemakers, we are forgetting that God has provided the ultimate example of one-sided peacemaking. The truth that defies human history and the personal experience of most of humanity is revealed by Jesus. And that is, most importantly, we can be at peace with God. What we must remember is that He is the initiator, the peacemaker. What happened when Jesus came into the world? Well, what happened to Jesus is like what happened in the South when some boys decided to go swimming in a little farm pond that had become infested with poisonous water moccasins. They jumped in, and those snakes latched onto the boys and pumped their venom into their bloodstream, and they died. Jesus came into our world, and he was pounced upon. Satan was the snake, but our sins and all of the sins of humanity were the venom that was pumped into his bloodstream, and he died. But in his case, it was not a surprise, and that was not the end of the story. But that fact did not make his death any less painful. So why did he do it? Well, because he was a peacemaker. Let's listen to some of Paul's words to the church in Ephesus when he saw that there was a lot of conflict there. And some of it was from Jews who were accusing the Gentiles, or who were saying that the Gentiles were not equal to Jews. And some of it was just between members of that church. As for you, you who are dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of the world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient, all of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature objects of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. So now we can have peace with God, and we have Jesus' example as a peacemaker. Peacemaking becomes our responsibility then, so that we can be at peace, not just with God, but also with others. Look at how Paul tells the Ephesians that this peace with God makes it their responsibility to make peace with others. Therefore, remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called the circumcision by those who call themselves the uncircumcised, by those who call themselves the circumcision, that done in the body by the hands of men. Remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who once were far away have been brought near through the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new man out of the two, thus making peace. And in his one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. Now, this was huge in their world. It was something that both sides would never have thought was possible. Many Jews at that time considered all non-Jews to be dogs who were created and allowed to exist for no other reason than to inhabit hell. Of course, that attitude didn't make them popular, and it resulted in extreme hatred of Jews in typical non-Jewish society. So if Jews and Gentiles could be brought together, individuals could be brought together in their relationships as well. And that's what Paul begins to stress in chapter 4. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Those are verses 2 and 3. Then look at 5:21. submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Now, the word submit only appears actually in verse 21, submit to one another. But then they add the word submit in English because it doesn't sound too good. But what it really says is submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, to your husbands as to the Lord. But what about husbands? Are they supposed to submit to? Yes. Here's how. Love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Well, what about children? Are they supposed to submit? Yes. Here's how. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. What about fathers? Is there some special way they're supposed to submit in that role? Yes. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. What about slaves, or in our case, workers? Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. If you've ever had a bad boss, you know how hard that can be. Well, what about if you're a boss? And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Submission is nothing more than peacemaking. Whatever the relationship, we can make it more peaceful by doing what Jesus did. What is the blessing in Matthew 5 for peacemakers? The blessing is they shall be called sons of God. If Jesus had been writing corny advertising copy in our day, he might have said, blessed are the Rolaids, because they consume 47 times their weight in excess acid. We can consume all that excess acid in our relationships, right? Or maybe we can think of ourselves as shock absorbers. We can be shock absorbers as we travel the rocky roads of our relationships. It was necessary for me once to be a peacemaker. It was when I met with the elders who I believed had not lived up to their commitment to support us as we planted a church in Germany. That was the plan. Then they found out that our support was going to cost more than they thought. We had already moved over to Germany. We were learning the language. We were working with another church so that we could kind of learn the ropes. Well, they had plenty of money to follow through with what they had promised, but they decided to back out after we had spent less than a couple of years in Germany learning the language, preparing before we actually were able to begin the work. They had also promised to pay for the expenses of moving. Well, when those expenses were revealed after we returned, they said, we're not going to pay those unless you come and talk to us. Well, I did not want to talk to them. I was 24 years old. These guys were all successful men, businessmen who seemed to have no respect for me. And so every time I would think about what they had done, my stomach would get upset. It was just that way for a year or so before we finally decided to move our stuff back. Well, I had to drive 2 hours from Memphis, where we lived at the time, to Little Rock, where the church was. And so as I drove, I listened to a tape of a sermon on this beatitude. It was by my favorite preacher, Jim Woodruff. I borrowed a lot of his points in this lesson. Well, I went into that meeting determined to be a peacemaker. Now, that didn't lead me to just say that they were right in how they handled the situation. I was able instead to calmly say to them that they were my shepherds, even though I was over there, and it was their responsibility to care for me and my family, not to mention the commitment that they should have felt to the German people that we were trying to save from their conflict with God and the world. And they listened, and at least one of them was very thankful for that, and they did pay our expenses. Now, if I hadn't gone with the determination to be done with the conflict between us, the meeting would have made things worse instead of better. But the truth was, I benefited more than they did. I never had an upset stomach again after that meeting, even when I played those things out in my mind again. And I kind of think that maybe none of them had ever had an upset stomach. That was kind of what upset me. Well, making peace with others is always possible if those others are only willing to accept our love and sacrifice. And it usually does help us even more than them. Yet there's an even greater mission that we have as peacemakers. The truth revealed by Jesus is that we can be at peace with God, we can be at peace with others, and we can be instruments of peace. We can help others to find peace with God. That was what we were hoping to do in Germany, and that's what our job as Christians is all about. We certainly see this demonstrated in Paul's life. Back up to chapter 3 of Ephesians. Paul says, I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace given me through the working of his power. Although I am less than the least of all God's people, the grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. It is a great power and privilege to tell others about God's love and the peace that is available to them as it is to us. But never forget this word of warning. Preaching the unsearchable riches of Christ will be fruitless without a demonstration of love and sacrifice. Preaching the unsearchable riches of Christ will be fruitless without a demonstration of love and sacrifice. We cannot pretend to reconcile others to God if we need to be reconciled to others. We must be peacemakers at the grassroots level before we have anything to say about the needs of others to be reconciled to God. You see, our own relationship with God has fundamental problems if there are big problems in our relationships with people. Let's go back to Matthew. Jesus speaks to two different scenarios that we might find ourselves in that involve conflict with others. The first is in chapter 5, just a few verses beyond this blessing. Starting in verse 23, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. In this situation, you are the offender. What is your responsibility? You take initiative and go and make peace. Well, that sounds reasonable, fair actually. But look at the other scenario in Matthew 18. If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault, just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. But if he will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, then treat him as you would a tax collector or a pagan. Now, how are we to treat tax collectors and pagans, those who are not loved by society? We're to love them, of course, but not to treat them as brothers until they have made peace with God. Now, in this one, you're the victim, notice. But notice that either way, Jesus says you be the initiator. As Paul says in Romans 12, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. When people see the attitude of a peacemaker in us, they are nearer to God than they were before. In fact, the only way we can bring people closer to God is to let his Spirit rule in us and then get closer to them. The words of Isaiah the prophet that revealed the nature of Jesus and his rulership talk about peace. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. The peace in his government, which is his rulership over us, affects every area of our lives. Peace at home, peace between friends, peace on the job, world peace, inner peace, but most importantly, peace between us and God. The poem you probably heard, maybe as a song, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, is often attributed to Francis of Assisi, but it actually cannot be found before 1912, 700 years or so after he died. That doesn't really matter because it became popular during times of world wars, World War I and World War II, and what matters is its message. After it was translated into English, it was even read into the Congressional Record in 1928 during that time of that First World War. And this is really our prayer today. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. The lesson is yours.